post-podcasters here. If you're wondering what we talked about in this discussion, we went into our stories about how we got into self-improvement and the problems that doing self-improvement for self-improvement's sake led to. We then moved on to the problems of pursuing self-improvement for self-improvement's sake so that we could better understand the solution that we propose of self-improvement after self-improvement. And in order to figure out what that is, I guess you'll have to watch the podcast. Welcome back to Digital Self-Actualization,
the podcast where we ask how we can reach our full potential using modern technologies.
I'm Maiden Helfont.
And I'm John Maverick.
And we're both past video game addicts turned content creators and lifelong learners. Hello. John and I are ecstatic to help you and welcome you to the first episode of Digital Self-Actualization. John, give a drum beat.
Good thing I have a shock mount.
Yeah, that would be
so awful on the microphone.
Uncomfortable noise. So for the first episode of Digital Self-Actualization, we thought a great starting topic would be self-improvement after self-improvement. You're probably wondering, what does that mean, Aiden and
what
John?
What does that mean, Aiden?
Exactly. Thank you, John. Well, I think it would be good to tell a story to highlight it. So I'm going to tell my story of getting into self-improvement, and then John is going to tell his. And then we'll explain what we mean by self-improvement after self-improvement and how that connects to digital self-actualization. So that being said, I remember I first got into self-improvement when COVID hit. And this was a time of intense loneliness, boredom, and stagnation for me. I was going to online classes, literally working out at the same time as going to them because I was so bored. I was playing video games way more hours than I should have, already more so than during the summer. And I wasn't really learning that much. So I wasn't doing too hot. But in the midst of this loneliness, this boredom, this stagnation, I found this YouTube video which talked about the 7 habits of highly effective people. And I was hooked immediately. The 7 habits of highly effective people promise this world of improvement instead of stagnation, of engagement instead of boredom, of connection instead of loneliness. And self-improvement became my sanctuary in COVID. I started eating self-improvement for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. I started breathing self-improvement. I finished the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, read Atomic Habits. I read How to Win Friends and Influence People. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. It started slowly and imperceptibly at first, but the problems of getting into this self-improvement phase started to show themselves in my life. First, I remember after reading Deep Work, I started enacting deep work hours. That's literally what I called them, John. It was pretty stupid. But anyways, hours from 7 to 11 in the morning where I was like, this is when I work. No distractions. Parents would knock on the door saying they wanted to say hi. I'll be like, no, deep work. I have to focus.
Your mom woke up and said like, yo, it's my birthday. And you're like, nope,
exactly.
Deep work.
I'm like, no, deep work time. I'm sorry, Mom. No birthday for you. I didn't realize until later they just wanted to see me before I went off to college. I remember when I got to Cornell, I took all the productivity advice that I had learned from these self-improvement books and just applied all of it. I was like the ultimate work machine. I was a unit. But I noticed that my anxiety and restlessness started to rise. And one day, as I was at Cornell and I was handling like 4 clubs, YouTube channel, podcast, newsletter, a girlfriend, and a full-time schoolwork, I woke up and I literally could not get out of bed. That much was going on in my head. And then I get a text on my phone, and it's from my girlfriend. She says, "We need to talk." Now, I don't know
Dun,
about you,
dun,
John, but
dun.
that is like the one thing you do not want to hear from your girlfriend, because "we need to talk" was exactly what I was expecting it to be. I walked into her room a little bit later and she almost broke up with me because I wasn't being present enough in the relationship for her. And what I realized was like a slap in the face in that moment was that I had let self improvement tread on my values. Because by getting into self improvement, I had focused so hard on self improvement for the sake of self improvement that I hadn't made sure that I was improving with my values in mind. And that is the essence of what I think the problem is with doing self-improvement for the sake of self-improvement, is it's not rooted in something deeper, more primordial, more meaningful for your life. And therefore, like I did throughout high school and into much of college, I wasn't following the values that gave me meaning. I wasn't building my relationships as much. I wasn't working on
Mhm,
stuff as much that I actually felt was meaningful. Like I remember there was a phase of me creating Obsidian YouTube videos where I just created Obsidian YouTube videos because I knew that's what was doing well, not
mhm,
what like spoke to my soul. And yeah, I hurt relationships with parents, family, my brother, my girlfriend. Thankfully, it's better now, which is what we'll get on to later. But that's my story. And I'd love to hear any reactions you have, as well as your story for getting into self improvement and
mhm.
how it affected you.
I mean, before I go on with mine, like, I don't know, it's nice seeing kind of the whole bigger picture because I never actually really fully understood where your self-improvement journey came from. Like, I've heard the highs and lows with, like, your anabolic diet
Yeah.
and just with your girlfriend almost breaking up with you, or your ex, I should say now, but
Yeah.
never how it all started. So it's just really nice to hear the whole bigger picture and where you've come to just today and now.
Mm, mm.
It's definitely not as soul sucked by self-improvement as you once explained yourself to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of had a similar general experience, but instead of that self-improvement space of 7 habits of highly effective people or atomic habits, my first glimpse of self-improvement actually began through gaming because I grew up in a very small and quiet town in Canada, which is known for farmers and flat land. And there's nothing exciting like LA or New York or any other major city. So instead, to pass the time and to have fun, I would just play games online with my friends for up to 16 hours a day. I even got an iPad in grade 2, and that was all for me. I just watched YouTube videos all day. In elementary school, my weekends and summers would just be all spent just playing Minecraft with friends, beating the Ender Dragon, automating farms, just min-maxing the Minecraft world.
Mm.
And in high school, it even transitioned into more than just that, also just through FPS games. So I played a lot of Counter-Strike, I played a lot of Rainbow Six Siege, and in these games, I was top 1%, even top 0.1% or top 0.0047%. I take pride in
Yeah.
that one. But yeah, the only problem was I didn't really transfer it with my life because with school, I still got good grades, but I never really pushed myself to the same limits that I did in games. I still saw school and other life activities as just something I had to do. I just didn't have
Mm.
that same passion and curiosity. But then in November 2020, that's when my mom finally introduced me to the same rabbit hole of self-help. I remember she would always listen to different self-help like podcasts and videos on her iPad in the kitchen. I just overhear it and I think like, oh, this is so stupid. Like, of course you should care about your life. Of course you should like, I don't know, just improve yourself. But it wasn't until she gave me my first book, I got that first taste of it. And that book was Limitless. Looking back,
Mm,
definitely wasn't the most profound book, but just just experiencing that autonomy and potential for improvement firsthand of overcoming my own limiting beliefs, I found to be really empowering.
mm,
And from there, I just continued reading more because I really enjoyed kind of that, like what you said, the autonomy, the improvement possible from these books, just how my mindset continuously changed. I started reading the more generic ones just about like Mindset by Carol Dweck, Grit, It's Not About You. I was almost brainwashed into just a completely different person that was obsessed with self improvement. And it just completely changed my worldview. I even stopped hanging out with friends because they wouldn't read the same books as me. We were on completely different social media algorithms. They were on still on games and half naked women, and I was more so focused on intellectual ideas and personal growth.
mm.
And I even felt self-conscious during family gatherings because they would just all focus about having fun, and I was just sitting there like, "Why is no one talking to me about habits? Come on." More people drinking alcohol, you know, it's a bad habit, right?
You're like,
Yeah.
you go up to one of them, you're like, "Did you know if you get 1% better every single day, you would be 37.78 times better by the end of the year?"
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not have the courage to be an evangelist, but I was an inner evangelist at heart. And yeah, just it's a very strong mindset. Like I believe that if you didn't improve yourself or help the world, then you're wasting your life. So it's very
Mm,
extreme. I think it just
mm.
came from that rabbit hole echo chamber.
Instead of
And
slaying the ender dragon, you could slay this Pomodoro timer.
yeah. And get XP from IRL achievements.
Yeah.
And yeah, just combined with that like that inner drive as well as with the realization like, hey, I've been spending so much of my life just playing games and I have yet to really give back to my parents for making sacrifices to bring me to Canada and to give me this opportunity. It was a lot of motivation and responsibility for me at the time. And I just began becoming a self-improvement workaholic. 16 hours a day. I maintained a 96% average. I read 1 to 2 books a week. I self-learned programming. Just all these different things. I was the epitome of a self-improvement prodigy. But then in April of 2021, I got COVID
Mm,
and I've had a respiratory issues throughout the majority of my life, getting bronchitis, pneumonia, and it just completely shattered kind of that mystical experience I had with self-improvement because I
mm,
was lying there sick with my parents. And at the time, COVID was still starting, so I didn't know how low the death rate actually was.
mm,
But I still felt scared. I felt very existential about my life because I didn't want me or my parents to pass away because of COVID.
mm,
And just the atmosphere. I remember just lying in my bed. It was sickly. It was isolating, just alone in my room. And I just spent that time reflecting as I was facing what could have been death and realized that although the self-improvement journey has changed me into a much better person, I was also, like you, neglecting a lot of my core values because I was neglecting my friends, like I mentioned earlier, for the sake of self-improvement. I was neglecting just even my own happiness with such rigid time blocking and productivity. So as a result, after that, I had a much more healthier relationship where I
mm,
began slowly caring more about my own personal fulfillment and life as well.
mm. Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't have the full picture until you described it right then. So it was really interesting for me to hear, especially the part about getting sick with COVID,
Mhm.
because I think we often see something like that as a bad thing. But for you, for you, it ended up being a highly life altering experience. You reevaluated where your values were at. So
Mhm.
that was very interesting. I
Mm.
feel like we both came from that video game addiction
Mhm.
side. So yeah, thanks for sharing. I think one thing that we want to make clear is self improvement isn't inherently bad. Like we did grow a lot. I'm sure you
Mhm.
could describe many things that you ways you grow during the journey. Like I certainly got way more productive. Um, I started to have a mindset of growth. Like before, the mindset wasn't, oh, growth is a given. Like I should be getting better every day. It was just like, hey, Ender Dragon, hmm,
The
or something fun like that. So like self improvement isn't inherently bad. The problem is we just didn't root it in values that meant a lot to us, and therefore we treaded on them a lot.
Mhm. And, like, I don't know, it's interesting because can you really fault us for doing so? If we look at just the way traditional society is structured, it's transitioned into more of a achievement-based society, where it's very dependent on how well you do in things like school, like, if you get good grades, if you get a good job to support your family, and I'm not sure how often we really come into moments where we have the time to self-reflect and discover our own identity and see if this identity is aligned with these traditional metrics. Can you think of
Yeah.
any experiences like that? Like in school, where like, hey, what do you value? Make sure that you make sure you find a job that you love, not just get good grades.
I can only think of my new like one-off one experiences, not like a general
Hmm.
feeling that that was the case. Yeah, I think unless there was anything else you wanted to say, I think it's a good time to move into like what are the problems with self-improvement that lead to what happened for us, because that will give us a foundation off of what is self-improvement after self-improvement look like. By understanding the problems, we can better understand the solutions to those problems. How does that sound?
Awesome. What would you say is your biggest critique about self improvement then?
I have a number of critiques. I think one that I want to start off with is that fundamentally self-improvement is a business that sells hope. When when you are in the self-improvement rabbit hole, it feels intoxicating. It's
Hmm.
amazing. You're like, "I can do anything." Everyone else around you is telling you that you can follow your dreams, you can improve yourself as long as you just work hard and diligently, then you can reach your greatest aspirations. And then you'll be watching videos, you'll be watching podcasts, you're in this little bubble of self-improvement. You get this one YouTuber who's like, "Hey, watch this video and you can do this." And then that YouTuber's like, "Oh, that wasn't enough. Well, here's my $99 course on the subject. Oh, that wasn't enough. Well, you can get the full package and get my $1,000 course and your firstborn child." Oh, and then you're just like, that's when you
I'm
realize that something's
17. I'm gonna have to be
off.
a teen dad to offer.
Yeah, yeah, like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Right? So you're in the bubble, and then the bubble pops, and you realize that you were never meant to succeed. Because if you actually succeeded in self improvement, then the business wouldn't thrive anymore. So you're trained to be constantly dissatisfied with yourself. Oh, I'm not productive enough. I don't have good enough relationships. I can't meditate for long enough. I still play video games for an hour a day and it should be zero, whatever, right? And that feeling is it's draining, right? You're constantly running forward. Where are you running? You don't know, but you have to keep running because you're terrified that if you stop running, then you'll become the person that you were before self-improvement. So you're
Mhm.
running to get this thing of improvement, but you can never get the one thing that you truly want enough. So I think that's one major issue that I have.
Mhm. Yeah, you bring up really good points. I think we both have had experiences where We try to buy into these dreams that influencers sell for the sake of potentially improving our lives. And sometimes these dreams aren't even major problems, but your they agitate you in a way where it seems like it's like such a big deal, and they make it so much more easier to spend all this money and time. And I remember you said it was a bubble, but I think there's a special four-letter word that starts with a C called it starts with cult. I can maybe better describe what you were explaining there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Like as much as that optimism for helping each other succeed is and to empower people is, I think there also needs to be a sense of realism and yeah, just because like I don't know, like it's just you're on borderline delusion if you're to completely follow and indoctrinate what these self-improvement YouTubers and figures have to say.
Yeah, yeah.
And when it comes to the idea on how in reality all we need is enough, it really reminds me of the idea of the having mode versus being mode in
Mm, mm,
Buddhist philosophy. Because in having mode, you're constantly trying to have different things. You're trying to achieve these different milestones you have. Like, oh, I need to get a six pack. I need to earn six figures, earn 10K a month. But in reality, like, does that even matter? The goalposts are just going to keep on moving.
mm,
Instead, I feel like if you want more consistent satisfaction and fulfillment in your life, you need to be in a consistent state where you are pretty satisfied and fulfilled with what you already have while still trying to strive for more.
mm. I'm really glad you brought up that last point because self-improvement cult, as you said, uh, it turns being mode things into having mode things. So it's like, oh, you want to be more content with your life? As like a self-improvement thing. Well, now we're going to turn that into a having mode thing. Oh, so now you have to practice meditation. You got to get really good at it. You better be able
Mm.
to meditate for a long time because that's how you improve. So like it turns stuff that shouldn't be measured, stuff that shouldn't be like a competition into having mode things. You're like, "Oh, I have to be able to I better meditate like 10 minutes every day and then meditate even more." Um when it's like that's fundamentally missing the point of it's like you're strengthening your ego, not diminishing it.
Mhm. I mean, you can see where they're coming from though, because if you actually turn it into something that becomes a exercise, a routine, or a goalpost, then they could say, "Hey, I have a solution just for you. Just gotta pull out your credit card."
Exactly, exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think we've explored that one pretty well as like the business of hope, selling hope. I think another
Mhm.
thing, tell me what you think of this, is another problem I have with self-improvement is it's often productive procrastination in disguise.
Really?
Yeah, it's like there's one thing to consume self-improvement, it's another thing to apply self-improvement. And because the first feels so good, we often mistake it for the second and then don't do it. I'm not saying I've never applied self-improvement stuff. Of course I've applied some self-improvement stuff, but there is a lot of stuff that I've read where I've just been like, "Hmm, nice."
Yeah.
And then you don't actually do anything. I think a good analogy to understand it is like it's like doing the tutorial mission in a video game over and over again, mastering the tutorial mission, but then never actually going out and playing the real game. So you get this like illusion that you're super good. You're like, wow, I'm just destroying this tutorial. Uh, but the real learning comes from going out into the real world and failing and then learning and that way instead of doing the tutorial over and over again.
Mhm. Yeah, just actual application of what you learn beyond just trying to passively consume it and internalize it, I feel like is really important. And even I'm guilty of it as of recently, which we did talk about in a previous call. Because just for context, me and Aiden have been doing deep dives into what it means to become wise and just be your ideal self. But the problem with that is that we've just been mostly listening to a lot of books, reading a lot of articles, and taking a lot of courses on what it means to become wise. But
Mm,
if we follow this kind of principle, how much are we actually applying it and practicing it in our lives?
mm,
Because, yeah, we both started watching this one lecture series, and one of the first things he mentioned was how the art of being wise has to be treated like lifting weights and getting lean, being muscular. It's literally the same thing because if just like how when you work out, you need to train your muscles, you need to actually do the thing, physically exert yourself. You can't just read a lot of books on how to diet, how to ideally work out like your back muscles, how to get a six pack. That's not going to give you the results you want.
mm.
And I felt like that was something I missed out on when trying to pursue a life of wisdom was not fucking meditating.
It's like you're just reading about meditation. You're like, wow, this sounds real cool.
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, I feel enlightened right now, like, when's the enlightenment coming?" But
Yeah.
in reality, it's
You're
something
like,
that you have to genuinely experience and find out yourself
you
beyond
take
p
beyond.
propositional knowing.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Beyond just like learning about the words
Mhm.
and facts about like meditation and stuff. For some reason, the image that came to my mind when you were saying that is like, you're like, I need to go on a diet. So you buy like a vegan cookbook and you read a ton of recipes and then you never make any of them.
You just manifest a diet.
Yeah, you're just like, if I just read enough vegan recipes, then I'll be vegan. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, that's real funny. I had one other problem, main problem with self improvement, but I'm curious before I say it, if there were any big problems you can think of. Uh,
I think I had similar ideas as you, but another idea I had in mind was just how a lot of the modern mental illnesses and existential dilemmas we face can be resulting from the very thing that we are trying to do to improve our lives.
mm,
Because in a sense, I feel like this is an idea from the book Burnout Society, and I might butcher it, but
butcher it.
we essentially become masters of ourselves. We don't need society to tell us what to do because we already are such strict um, masters on telling us, like, hey, we have to be following these routines, we have to be achieving these goals. And when we fail to meet our expectations, we end up becoming burnt out. That's when our output, our the time we spend doing things doesn't really match the output we get, and that mismatch
Mm,
can make us demotivated. It can also end up in feeling depressed, where like you genuinely just don't feel content with who you are as a person
mm.
because you have such high ideals. But in reality, these ideals we set upon ourselves might not even be what we truly want or what is actually ideal for us.
Yeah, I'm super glad you brought that up because in many ways there's this very difficult fine line between setting a high expectation to help yourself strive harder and setting it lower so that you can be content with how far you've already come. And where is the line to draw there? It's really hard. One of the things that I'm thinking of is, funnily enough, sabbaticals.
Hmm.
And the reason I'm thinking of those is oftentimes my dad has gone into a sabbatical. And for those who aren't in academics, it's basically just like a time where you don't have to teach as a professor and you're expected to work on things that you usually don't get to because of teaching. So, like book writing or research or something like that. So he goes into the sabbatical one year and he's like, I'm going to get so much done. It's going to be incredible. I'm going to be a machine. And he gets like almost nothing done. I'm sorry,
Oh
dad,
no.
but in his words.
Exposing him.
But he does another sabbatical like a year later. And he's like, I don't really like, I think I'm just going to be more like relaxed with this one. Don't need to get that much done. And he gets more done in that sabbatical than in the first one. And that makes me very curious because there's this weird line in self-improvement where like if you get too into self-improvement, you're constantly dissatisfied and that you
Mhm.
set this really high bar which you can fool yourself into thinking is what is making you improve. But then at the same time, sometimes when you have less expectations for yourself, you actually do better. And the question is navigating that balance. That's where the real difficulty comes in.
Well said. I think it was worth throwing your dad under the bus. It's like,
He's
yeah,
probably gonna listen to this, so unfortunate.
sometimes putting in more effort might not actually result in more accomplishments being made,
Yeah,
paradoxically.
exactly. I think the last main one problem that I have with self improvement for the sake of self improvement is meaninglessness. I think that
Yes.
w- when you do self improvement for the sake of self improvement, it loses meaning. You're getting healthier, but what for? You're getting more productive, but what for? You're improving your relationships, but you're getting more charismatic, but what for? Um, like a lot of the things that I improved at in my journey actually made it harder to find meaning. Like I got really good at focusing for deep work, but that led to me not being able to see my parents or my brother or my friends as
Mm.
much. uh, I became more charismatic, but I didn't feel like I was as authentic in my interactions. In fact, John, there was one dinner I had at a dining hall where 5 minutes into the conversation, the guy I was talking to straight up asked me if I'd read How to Win Friends and Influence People.
He got completely
Yeah,
exposed.
which is like, at that point, are you really being yourself or are you parroting what you've heard in a book? Uh,
Mhm.
and same thing with my content creation. I got better at creating content, but it just helped me create more content on Obsidian, which I resonated with for a while. But there was also a good period where I was creating content and I felt like there are other people just making better content and it didn't feel alive for me anymore. So clearly, we can't just do self improvement for the sake of self improvement. It has to be rooted in something deeper. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on that first, but I think that's where it goes to the next part of the conversation of what does self improvement look like after self improvement?
Mhm. Off the top of my head, I'm just thinking that I'm just realizing how unfortunate it is that most self-improvement content is based, especially for the younger demographic, is based just on this meaninglessness. Because there's so much videos I see online on how to make $10,000 a month online or how to like get with any girl, but it's missing the personal meaning and significance beyond just these objectives. Because okay, you hit 10K a month, what now? You're not prepared to
20K.
handle that much money. Yeah, 20K, like you're just gonna continue optimizing like a robot in a factory for these unrealistic expectations. And I feel like that is what is really harming the idea of self-improvement.
Mm, mm.
Instead of thinking about how to make 10K a month, we should first think about whether we even need that or why we need it in the first place. Because most of the time, you might not, and you might find much more fulfillment in a different goal.
I feel
Like
like you
making
have
20K a
to
month. I'm kidding.
20K. I feel like you have to tell the parable of the fisherman and the business person now. I think it's just too good.
I'm gonna butcher it, but
I'll correct anything.
okay, yeah. So there is this fisherman's parable where there was this capitalist businessman who goes up to a Mexican fisher. He sees him just casually fishing, and he asks the fisherman, "Why are you just fishing? You know you could be doing so much more, right? You could hire a team of fishermen. You can start scaling your operations. You can start selling your fish globally. You can get sponsorships with influencers to promote your fish product." Okay, maybe that one wasn't part of the parable, but the thing was the capitalist was just constantly urging him to scale his operations and to maximize his outputs. So then he could finally retire and stop fishing. But the fisherman asked them, like, "Why would I do that? What's the point of scaling?" And the capitalist responds, "So you could spend more time doing other stuff, like enjoy life, spend time with your family, get to just relax." But the fisherman says, "Why can't I just do that right now? That's already what I'm doing."
Yeah, you basically got it. I think the the one line that made it so funny the first time I saw it is a fisherman's like, Why should I do that?" And then the captain's like, "Well, then you could finally like retire and spend your time fishing." And the fisherman's like, "Fu- like
Okay, I don't know if I actually read that one. That was just so stupid.
it was so funny. I was like the first time I read it, I was like, "Oh my god." So yeah, I think that hits home so well. Like, what's the point of what we're doing here? And I think that's where we get into the last part of this whole self-improvement after self-improvement thing, which is that it needs to be rooted in something deeper, something more primordial, something, dare I say, more wise.
Whoa.
Whoa. I think what we need is self-improvement after self-improvement, which is self-improvement combined with wisdom, which I like to call self-actualization.
You coined the
Uh,
term self-actualization?
no, no, I
I'm
did
kidding,
not. I
I'm
did
kidding.
not. That'll be kind.
Wait,
That'll
that's
be
the name of
kind
our
of
podcast. Oh my goodness.
yeah. So the question that I think would immediately arise is like, what is wisdom, uh, and how do we build it with self improvement for self actualization? I think for the purposes of the podcast, I'm not going to expound a huge definition of wisdom.
Please do not send me a
Yeah.
3 sentence definition of wisdom.
No, I think all I'll say is I'll say like a much more simple version. And if you really want to dive into like a deep dive on what wisdom is, then we might be able to do a podcast on just that.
Mhm,
Or we could put in the show notes like a link to an article, a couple
mhm.
articles that I've written. But for the purposes of the podcast, I'm just gonna say wisdom is the skill of properly valuing, prioritizing, and acting, balancing various interests for the common human good, keeping context in mind. I think that simple enough, no like really weird terms in there. Um, and I think this with this is where we can really see the problem of self-improvement for self-improvement's sake is that what's the point in becoming healthier, more productive, more intelligent, more fit, whatever, if it's not done with wisdom? You'll literally just be better at not following your values. Like, so yeah, I think that we need to think of how we can combine those two. Um, and before we go into how you might be able to do that, I wanted to hear if there's anything that else you wanted to talk about in regards to self-actualization, like what it is.
Do you think it's fair that we explain the general principle of self-actualization?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Like the sailboat analogy.
Mhm. Uh, because instead of just purely goals of improvement, self-actualization primarily focuses on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's 2 levels. There's the deficiency needs and the growth needs. And in self-improvement, most of the time, you spend your time just overcoming these deficiency needs, like basic living, hunger, food, safety, shelter, belonging. But once you go past that, there's not much real meaning behind like doubling your food because you've already met your requirements that you need.
Mm,
Instead, the next level would be to pursue these growth needs. And in the book Transcend, I really resonate with his division of them. It is exploration, love, and purpose.
Mm.
And I don't think those are things that are usually talked about in self improvement or valued in the traditional self improvement space. I guess purpose is, but I don't think they really go into much nuance about it.
Yeah, like I think obviously in the self-improvement space you can find more wise ways of going about it. The problem is that there's just so much content in the bubble with the problems of what we talked about before that it's so easy to get stuck in that.
Mhm.
And that's why I think it's helpful to have this idea of self-actualization, of being like self-improvement plus wisdom instead of just doing self-improvement because there's too much content on self-improvement that isn't
Mhm.
wise.
Yeah, the infusion of wisdom helps you grow beyond just that having mode and transfers into a being mode where you can also focus on how you want to improve the world,
Yeah.
to improve for something beyond yourself
Yeah.
and to transcend beyond yourself as well.
I'm super curious. I have my own ideas as well, but how do you think the way you've gone about self-improvement has changed with the idea of self-actualization and wisdom?
Mhm.
And then we can go into how to build that practically afterward.
Mhm. Well, I mean, my transformation kind of was practical, so I think I would have to blend a bit there, but
Yeah.
I think just realizing that in life, there's much more than just the goals we set for ourselves in traditional metrics like career and generic self improvement metrics. But there's also just a lot of other dimensions we should account for in our life. And I think the most beneficial way I've been able to be aware of this and to work towards it has been the idea of a wheel of life, because with it, you visualize all the core areas of your life. And that is where you can intentionally find balance amidst all of them. Because if you have a janky wheel where one is much more built, much more extended than the others, then it's not going to work as a wheel. It has to be in balance. And just intentionally taking the time to attend to those areas during my reviews on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis has been helpful in maintaining that balance beyond just only focusing on my programming career or only focusing on my YouTube.
Mm,
Because
mm,
there's so much more dimensions to life, like the spirituality aspect, the relationship aspect with your friends, family, and even a partner. And and I think having a meaningful life requires connectedness across all those areas.
mm. So this is Ali Abdal's like wheel of life that has like spirituality, friendships, romantic
Yeah.
relationships, family, and then how does it work? Like you assign a number value it to based on how you think you're doing, and then you can see like where on the wheel you're too locked in and where in the wheel you're not locked in enough.
Yeah. So at the start of your year, you can spend some quiet time just reflecting on what your core values are and then transferring that into how you want to shape your wheel of life. And I personally mark that in my obsidian. And on my weekly basis, I have time to reassess myself and my different values to see if I am roughly around those metrics. And obviously, it's not like, "Oh, yeah, I want everything to be a 10." You have to be reasonable about it too. You have to know where you wanna make sacrifices.
Mm,
And just
mm,
being able to constantly be aware of whether I am falling short of those different areas, I find has been helpful in course correcting into the more balanced life and connected life I want to strive for.
mm. I think that's a fantastic example and a great way of rooting self-improvement in the values that you care about instead of just doing self-improvement for the sake of self-improvement.
Mhm.
Um, which
What's
is
yours?
yeah, I mean I wrote down a whole list of like
Sure.
Ways I don't worry, I won't go into, like, a huge amount of I wrote down a whole list of, like, ways that I feel I've applied wisdom into self-improvement to try and fight back against the problems that we mentioned before. Um, like, I'll go through a few of them because I think that they really help illuminate. One of them is, like, working smarter instead of harder. It's really
Mm.
easy to think in the self-improvement space, "Oh, if I just put in 80-hour weeks, that's how I'll do it." But if you're sailing in the wrong direction as where you wanna be going, working harder is actually getting you farther away from the destination. Another big one has been loving myself for myself. In the
Mm.
self-improvement space, it's so easy to get caught up in always wanting to be better, and I do still value growth a ton, but I do so now from a place of abundance rather than from deficiency. I want to
Mhm.
grow, but I don't see myself as being short on all the places I'm growing in. Instead, I see on how far I've come from where I started, thinking of the gain, not the gap. Uh, I also know there's no quick fix or self improvement hack. Have you ever seen a self improvement video that's titled something like uh, "Do this and you'll to make $10,000" something? Yeah, and you're just like, okay. Uh, Paradoxically, taking the shortcut is actually the long way because it doesn't work, and taking the long way is the shortcut because it's the only path that works out.
Mhm.
So it's trippy. Um, Another thing I've realized is how contextual all advice is. I've often found self improvement videos tend to have blanket advice that doesn't take into account the specific context of the person watching it. And because I've realized this, I've started to value questions more than I value advice.
Mm.
Advice is individual, questions are universal because questions can be applied anywhere and adapted to the individual context, right?
Yeah.
Like a question like, I mean, like for you, am I balanced in my wheel of life as I want to be? Like, how does my wheel of life look? That's a question. Instead of
Yeah.
saying a piece of advice like, oh, your wheel of life should have this exact amount of numbers for each thing. That
Mhm.
is advice, but it doesn't work for everyone because people have different values for what they want in their wheel of life. Um, so that's another big one. I think also realizing the difference between productivity and productive procrastination, like consuming content on self improvement versus actually applying it. I just overall consume less stuff now than I did before because it's impossible to actually apply everything you learn in a self improvement book if you're reading like one every single week. So I think those are some of the main ones for like how how I've applied wisdom into self improvement. But yeah, I think there's a lot. There's more I could say about how I've tried to actively build wisdom instead of specifically just applying it to self improvement as well. But I'd like to hear your thoughts first.
Mhm. Well, that was a rapid fire machine gun display of practices. I think the main ones I resonated with were just the idea of questions over explicit instruction, because I feel like with that, it's you really take the time to connect it with your own life as well. Because there's no way a YouTube video with a million views is able to specifically address and really dive deep and connect with each single person.
Mm.
Maybe they are because all million viewers are the same person. I don't know, but I think most cases it's very hard to do so. And being able to develop that own inner critical thinking skill of applying the information that you intake into your own life, I feel like is very valuable for developing wisdom as well, and eventually into self actualization.
Mm.
And
Mm.
I think another thing, just connecting kind of your idea of working with abundance rather than deficiency really ties in with the idea of those having mode versus being mode philosophies,
Mm.
because you are already seeing yourself as in being mode. And where that you don't have that negative energy as that kind of double-edged fuel kind of propelling you to your goals, which can
Yeah.
lead to a more healthy and natural way of progression.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think you got it slap on. Uh, and I'm curious, are there any other like major things you can think of you've done to apply wisdom and self improvement for self actualization?
Wisdom and self-improvement for self-actualization. I think just the act of contemplation, like what you said, not like what you said, but just when you talked about just consuming less, just disconnecting from what other people may recommend and just taking that time to develop that inner voice and inner thought. Because otherwise,
Mm.
if you don't have that inner control, if you hear the banging, apologies. I told my dad we'd be recording, but if we don't have that inner control, then it's going to be very easy to slip back into just following kind of the default path and what our algorithms may encourage us to think,
Yeah.
which then
That
would strip us from our own personal significance and meaning derived from the activities we do.
that last point you made in particular about the algorithm, I think that's another practical thing that I've thought about is like wisdom involves not listening to one source. So if your entire feed is self improvement, there's a problem. Like,
Especially if it's
so
from the
and
same YouTuber and it's a cult.
yeah, exactly. So I think one of the ways I've also applied it is by varying my information diet.
Mhm.
I don't just consume self improvement. I consume academic articles, pop science, fiction, podcasts, everything of so many different topics, and that helps you get out of the bubble of self improvement.
Mhm.
Um, and so that I think that's another really valuable insight. Another thing I think has been super helpful is like regular reflection and review. I think experiencing, reflecting, and iterating is like the triforce of building wisdom.
Yes.
And one of the best practices I've ever instilled is daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly review and reflection. Um, which obviously I'm not going to tell you exactly how I do, but the principle is just reflecting on the experiences you've had and then iterating on them uh, to uncover your values, to see when your values change, right? It's not just about finding your values once, it's about adapting your life as you change because you will.
Mhm. And just that constant adaptation and adjustment of realizing who you are kind of reminds me of another distinction between self-improvement and self-actualization. Because self-improvement usually is towards an end goal, but with self-actualization, it's also just about the journey of
Mm,
developing your ideal self. And that is just inherently uncertain because as you continue reaching your peaks of who you are, you will have to rediscover what this next stage would be and whether you are on that track. And I feel like that's only possible with constant reflection, like what you do with your periodic reviews consistently, because otherwise we might end up going in a different direction than what
yeah,
we should be, like you mentioned.
I think that's a great distinction is the idea of self-actualization being the journey itself rather than what can happen in self-improvement where it's always in service of oh, now I'm that much better at focusing or I'm this goal at the gym or whatever. It's like self-actualization, the joy comes in the process of self-actualizing rather than ever reaching the end. I don't think you could fully self-actualize either. It's not like a destination. It's a journey to be experienced.
hmm I remember in Transcend, they were reading through Maslow's journals before he died. And even he had like such big self doubts. The person who
Yeah.
single handedly founded humanistic psychology, the idea of self actualization on the deathbed was like, oh my God, I still have so much left in life to do. I can't believe this is happening. So, yeah, I think
Yeah.
it really shows just the never ending, infinite game that it is.
Yeah. I think we've touched on quite a bit. Do you think there's anything else you want to hit upon?
Um, what's a fun question, I guess, to end it off with, considering that advice is not always the most helpful.
I think what I would leave off on is there's a lot in this podcast that we've talked about. So I think you should apply everything. I'm kidding. You should apply one or two things, especially in this latter part, if you feel like you resonate with the journey that we've been talking about. And don't worry about trying to do everything because a part of wisdom is realizing it's better to take the long road, as we were saying, instead because it is the shortcut than to take the shortcut and think it's when that's actually the long way. So yeah, I think just the idea of valuing wisdom for wisdom's sake and trying to self actualize instead of just do self improvement for self improvement's sake is a good action item to take. Have some wisdom souffle.
Mm, change your diet, yeah. How do you
Yeah.
think you could wrap that essence up into just a single question for them to ponder upon?
How can I root my self improvement in wisdom so that I can self actualize while following my values?
Pretty solid. And I'd also add on top of that, if it's difficult to initially answer that question, you could also just start reflecting on your journey up until now. Kind of the same way that we kind of explained our journeys from being gaming addicts to falling down the self-improvement rabbit hole and then
Yeah.
slowly finding and crawling our way out of it and then seeing just where you
Yeah.
want to go from there.
Fantastic. I think that's a great spot to leave it off on.